Hi Trailblazers! We are going to learn 2 new vocabulary words today, and those vocabulary words are dominant trait and recessive trait. So first let's kind of look at what you already know about these terms. Maybe you don't even realize that you know something about these terms. First of all, here's a question for you. Which of these teams is the dominant team? Was it that team, or is this team the dominant team? Utah. All right, so which team do you think is the dominant team? Is it Arkansas or Utah? Based on these videos, which one do you think is the dominant team? Well, if you know your football, then you know the answer is Arkansas. They are the dominant team. Dominant means important, influential, or powerful. So you can see in this picture we have 2 football players. One is more dominant than the others. They are more influential, more powerful. Now, let's look at the other term, recessive. So let's look at another form of that word. This question says, which of these men has a receding hairline? Is it A or B? Who has the receding hairline? If you said A, you are correct. So someone who has a receding hairline, that means their hairline is like moving backwards. It's starting to disappear. Their hair is starting to recede. So that kind of sounds like the word recessive. Recessive describes something that can be covered up or hidden. It is less influential. So this would be the recessive wrestler. All right. So when you're thinking of a dominant trait, which one of these alleles do you think represents a dominant trait? Would it be a capital A or a lowercase a? Which one's going to be dominant? If you said 1, capital A, you are correct. So we just use a capital letter to show that that person has inherited a dominant allele. And then we use the lowercase letter to show the recessive. And the reason we do that is because it kind of makes sense. It's a capital letter, so it seems like it's more powerful, more influential, more important. Lowercase letter, a little less influential. So a dominant trait is a trait that shows up when the dominant allele is inherited. So if you inherit one dominant allele from one of your parents, then you are going to show that dominant trait because it can overpower or cover up the other trait. If you get a recessive trait, that only shows up if you inherit two recessive alleles. Because the recessive trait can be covered up or hidden, and it can be overpowered, if it is up next to a dominant allele, it's going to get covered up. So the only way you're going to show the recessive trait is if you have the recessive, two recessive alleles. Now, I just want to show you an example of that. Let's say that I got a recessive allele for eye color from my mom and a recessive allele for eye color from my dad. So my mom, I inherited blue eyes from my mom and blue eyes from my dad. Well, guess what color eyes I'm going to have? That's right, blue. So if I have two recessive alleles, two lowercase b's, oh, that might be backwards for you, then I'm going to show the recessive trait. Now, if I got a dominant allele for eye color from my mom and a dominant allele for eye color from my dad, put those together, two capital B's, I'm going to have the dominant trait, which is brown eyes. Okay, so that part kind of makes sense. Two dominant alleles makes a dominant trait. Two recessive alleles makes a recessive trait. But what happens when your mom gives you an allele for blue eyes and your dad gives you an allele for brown eyes? For brown eyes. This can happen because your mom might be pure for blue eyes and your dad might be pure for brown eyes. So if mom gives you a blue-eyed allele and dad gives you a brown-eyed allele, you're going to end up with a big B and a little b, which may be backwards for you, but you're going to end up with the dominant trait because those brown eyes are going to overpower or cover up the recessive trait, which is blue eyes. Now, this is a simplified version of what actually happens. It actually gets kind of more complicated than this. But for now, while I'm introducing these concepts, this is a really good illustration of what happens when you inherit this recessive allele, but it's covered up by the dominant. Now, here's an interesting question. Can this person have a blue-eyed child? The answer is yes. Because they have a big B and a little b, they could pass on this blue-eyed trait to their child. And if they have a child with someone else who passes on a blue-eyed gene, guess what? Their child could have blue eyes. And this is how you can have two brown-eyed parents. You can have two brown-eyed parents with a hidden blue-eyed gene, and guess what? Two brown-eyed parents can have a blue-eyed child because those hidden genes are in there. This is how I ended up with a redheaded child. So I have brown hair, my husband has brown hair, we have a child, Lucy, that has red hair. All right. Let's practice. If normal blood is dominant and hemophilia is recessive, which of these genotypes would have hemophilia? Capital N, lowercase n, lowercase, lowercase, or all of the above? Which one is going to have hemophilia? All right, if you said C, you are correct. In order to show that recessive trait, you have to have two recessive alleles, lowercase, lowercase. So that person would have hemophilia. These two would have normal blood, but this guy is what we call a carrier. So they would not have hemophilia, they would have normal blood, but they could pass on that recessive allele to their children. One more. If freckles are dominant to non-freckles, which of the following would show freckles? A, capital, B, capital lowercase, C, lowercase lowercase, or D, capital capital and capital lowercase? All right, if you said D, you are correct. Because both of these have a dominant allele, capital letter, they are both going to show the dominant trait, because this one obviously is going to show the dominant trait because that's all they have. They got dominant from mom and dominant from dad. Freckles and freckles. They're going to show freckles. These ones are obviously not because they got non-freckles from mom, non-freckles from dad, so they definitely aren't going to show freckles. This is the one that's a little bit challenging though. So they got a dominant freckles from one parent and a recessive from the other parent. So which one's going to show? Well, the dominant one is going to show. The recessive is going to hide or move back and be hidden. The dominant is going to overpower, and that person is going to show the dominant trait, which happens to be freckles. So these two are both going to show freckles. All right, guys. Thanks for watching.